Hello, everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, on the first day of the new school year, the entire 1-1B class was noisily discussing familiar things. Which teacher was difficult? Who had not finished their summer homework? And rumors about a new transfer student. The atmosphere was nothing special until the classroom door creaked open, revealing a strange student entering. He was tall and thin. His hair fell down, almost covering his face. His white shirt was wrinkled. His shoes were faded, as if they had been worn for many years. What stunned the whole class was not his sloppy appearance, but the absolute silence radiating from him. Not a single footstep, not a sound of a chair being pulled when sitting down, as if his presence was swallowed by space. The homeroom teacher, Mrs. Anna, looked at the list of new students in her hand and frowned slightly. She flipped through it, reading each line, but there was absolutely no sign of his name. After a moment of hesitation, she tried to keep her composure and introduced the class as a transfer student from a distant school named Daniel. That brief introduction caused a lot of whispering, but then everyone fell silent when Daniel raised his head. His eyes were dark and empty, not reflecting the light like normal people's eyes. There was something about that gaze that made everyone's skin crawl. A few students behind them even muttered that they felt cold when the gaze passed over them, as if they had just been pulled into a deep darkness. For the rest of the day, Daniel barely said a word. When the teacher called on him to answer a question, he just stood up, spoke a few short and dry sentences, showing no emotion. His friends tried to talk to him, but he only smiled faintly, a smile as stiff as a mask. What was even stranger, at lunchtime, no one remembered where Daniel sat. Some students said he sat in the corner of the cafeteria, some insisted he never appeared. This ambiguity sowed an indescribable confusion in their minds. At the end of the school day, when the bell rang, students rushed out, as usual. But the next morning, everything became strange. When the teachers took attendance, no one mentioned Daniel. His name was not on the class list. When asked, his friends hesitated, their eyes lost, as if trying to remember a vague dream. Some even insisted that there had been no new students yesterday. Only Anna, the homeroom teacher, still remembered every detail clearly. The empty eyes, the dry voice, and the coldness that filled the classroom when Daniel entered. She checked the files in the staff room, but there was no paper about him in the cabinet. No files, no photos, no date of birth, no parent contact. It was as if Daniel had never existed. The haunting began when many students had the same nightmare. In the dream, they were sitting in a familiar classroom, but all the desks and chairs were empty. Suddenly, from the back of the classroom, Daniel sat there, head down, hair covering his eyes. When they tried to get closer, he slowly raised his head, revealing a pale face, eyes as dark as a bottomless pit. A cold whisper echoed in his head. "Why don't you remember me?" Some students woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, their hearts pounding. The next morning, when they told their stories, they realized that their nightmares were exactly the same in every detail. This made the whole class sink into a deep fear. No one dared to mention Daniel's name, but everyone knew in their hearts that something unusual was surrounding them. On the third night after Daniel appeared, little Emily, who sat at the front desk, suddenly disappeared. Her family called the police, and the whole school was in an uproar. In Emily's room, people found a notebook with a hastily scribbled line. Remember his face before it's too late. No one could explain. The school's security cameras didn't even record Daniel's appearance. All that was left was the fear that was haunting every student. People began whispering that this was one of the biggest chilling scares that had ever happened in this school. A story that kept them awake at night. The darkness not only crept into their dreams, but also existed in the long, quiet hallways, where students swore they heard footsteps following them. But when they turned around, no one was there. The creaking of chairs in empty classrooms, the whispers from the end of the desks, all pointed to a chilling truth. Daniel was still there, even though no one wanted to remember. And then, one Monday morning, as the class sat waiting, the classroom door opened once more. Daniel walked in, still silent, still with his hair covering his face, as if nothing had happened. The whole class shuddered, not knowing if yesterday, the day before, or the days before were just dreams, or if the nightmare had now come true. That Monday morning, when Daniel walked in, the whole class was silent. Wide eyes were fixed on his figure, as if they had just seen someone who had disappeared come back to life. The atmosphere was so thick that everyone felt suffocated. Daniel slowly walked to the back of the class, pulled out a chair and sat down. The chair made a creepy sound, echoing like a crack tearing through the silence. No one dared to speak. A few students leaned over their desks, trying to avoid his gaze. Anna, the homeroom teacher, trembled as she entered the classroom, her eyes wide with horror when she saw Daniel sitting there. She dropped the documents on the ground, papers flying everywhere. In that moment, she realized that this was no longer an ordinary student, but the embodiment of a sinister mystery that was trapping the whole class in an endless loop. The most terrifying thing was that all the records still did not exist. She went to the principal's office over the weekend to find answers, but Daniel's file was not in any system. Even the principal claimed he had never accepted a student by that name. But now he sat there, alive and present, like a challenge. Horror stories began to circulate around the school. Students whispered that Daniel was the ghost of a child who had studied here, who had died in a terrible accident many years before. Others said that he was a lost soul from another world, trapped between memory and oblivion. Whatever the theory, they all had one thing in common: Daniel should not exist here. As time went on, the strange phenomena increased. One day, while the class was taking a test, the fluorescent lights on the ceiling suddenly flickered violently and then went out. In the darkness, the students could hear heavy, rapid breathing everywhere. A cold wind blew through, sending test papers flying. When the lights came back on, everything returned to normal except for a strange piece of paper on each person's desk. With the words scrawled, "Don't forget me," the whole class panicked. Some students screamed, tearing up the paper, but only made a mysterious hoarse laugh resound in their heads. After that day, many people decided not to go to school anymore. But in the morning, somehow, they found themselves sitting in the classroom, holding pens, facing Daniel. They didn't understand how they got there, only knowing that there was an invisible force pulling them back, trapping them in the haunted classroom space that Emily was still missing. The police had not found any traces, but strangely, some students claimed that they saw her shadow in the hallway at midnight, walking next to Daniel. When asked, they trembled and recounted that Emily's face was pale. Her eyes were lifeless. Her mouth moved as if she wanted to say something, but no sound came out. One afternoon, after school, a group of friends, including Mark, Sarah and Kevin decided to stay behind to investigate. They believed that there was something in this classroom that contained the answer. As the red sunset shone through the window, the room was filled with a gloomy atmosphere. Mark opened Daniel's desk drawer. Inside was only a thin notebook. On the first page was written a single line: "You have forgotten my face." As soon as he finished reading, the classroom door suddenly slammed shut. Cold wind rushed in. The tables and chairs shook violently. Whispers echoed from all directions. "Remember me." Sarah screamed in panic, and Kevin quickly grabbed Mark's hand and pulled him away. But before they could leave, they saw Daniel standing right in front of the door, his dark eyes staring at them. A stiff smile appeared on his face, causing their blood to freeze. When they woke up, it was the next morning. All three of them lying on their desks, cold sweat drenched. The notebook in the desk drawer had disappeared, as if it had never existed. They told everyone, but most of them did not believe it. Only Anna, the homeroom teacher, remained silent, her face pale. She remembered that a year ago, a student named Daniel had gone missing in this very classroom, and since then the school had been haunted by ghost stories, and now, with his return, the cycle of horror had begun. The mysterious knocking at night, the shadows appearing in the dark hallways. All of this was just the beginning of a series of more terrifying events to come. Ever since Mark, Sarah, and Kevin woke up in class with a hazy memory, the school has been engulfed in a series of strange phenomena. Ghost stories quickly spread through the hallways, each telling a different story, but all revolving around Daniel's shadow. Some students claim to have seen Daniel standing in the chemistry lab in the middle of the night, staring at an empty test tube with pitch-black eyes. Others swore they heard footsteps coming from the old basement, which had long been sealed off after a fire. Anyone who came curious would find the room empty, covered in dust, but in the moment the flashlight beam swept over, they would catch a glimpse of a tall, thin figure passing by. Anna, the homeroom teacher, had become increasingly haggard. She no longer had her usual stern demeanor, but instead had dark circles under her eyes from lack of sleep. Every night she had the same dream, standing in an abandoned classroom, listening to the sound of chalk being rubbed on the board. As she approached, the words in blood appeared on the board: "Don't forget my face." And the moment she turned her back, Daniel was standing right behind her, his cold breath on the back of her neck. One morning, the whole class discovered a new notebook on Emily's desk, The Missing Girl. The cover was old and frayed, but inside were pages of shaky handwriting. The first page read, "I am here, but you don't remember." Several other pages described the classroom in detail. Every desk, every chair, and in each description was a scrawled line: "Daniel sits here." No one dared to read on. As time went on, the students became more aware of his presence. When the class sat down to do their homework, they heard a steady tapping sound under their desks. When they turned back, there was nothing but darkness. When they left, in the hallway mirror, they saw another figure standing right behind them. But when they turned back, the hallway was empty. One night, Sarah stayed at school to practice performing arts. As she passed the music room, she heard the piano playing. The melody was slow, sad, and creepy enough to make goosebumps rise all over her body. Sarah opened the door with trembling hands, and there sat Daniel on the chair, his skinny hands on the keys. He turned around, his deep black eyes staring at her. Sarah screamed, collapsing. When the others ran in, the room was empty. No piano, no Daniel, Only the lingering echoes of the notes lingered in the air. Kevin said he heard a soft voice calling him from the gym. The sound was vague, as if from afar, but it called his name. When he entered, he saw Daniel standing in the bleachers, the light shining on him, casting a long shadow on the wall. He didn't say a word, just smiled coldly and disappeared into the wind. Kevin ran away, but from then on he kept hearing the whisper in his ear every time he went to school, repeating, "Don't forget me." Mark wasn't so lucky. One night, he woke up in his dorm room, feeling someone standing at the end of his bed. In the dim light, Mark saw Daniel, silent, motionless. He just stared with empty eyes, then slowly walked closer. Mark screamed, but the screams wouldn't come out, stuck in his throat. He struggled, then sank into the darkness. The next morning, Mark was woken by his roommate. He was tired, panicked, and the sheets were stained with cold water like night dew. The police were called again, but all the evidence had disappeared, as if wiped clean by an invisible hand. They began to suspect that the student was making up stories to hide something. But Anna knew this was no joke. This was the return of an unliberated soul, trapped between memory and oblivion. Every day, the classroom became more like a place for ghosts than a place for learning. Ghost stories about Daniel spread throughout the town, causing parents to worry and request their children to be transferred to another school. But strangely, some students, even if they wanted to leave, could not. They dreamed of locked classroom doors, a dream that repeated itself until they were exhausted. Anna stood in front of the blackboard, her hand shaking as she held the chalk. She knew that if she did not find the truth, the whole class would be drawn into this ghostly cycle. She decided to go back to the school's old archives, where records from decades ago were kept, hoping to find clues about Daniel. But she did not expect that this very place contained a secret more terrifying than anything she could have imagined. That night, when the whole school was silent, Anna quietly walked down the long dark hallway to the old archive room. It was a room in the basement, where no one had been for many years. The heavy wooden door creaked when she pushed it open. A cold, damp air rushed out, making her shiver. The light from the small flashlight was weak, shining into the dark space, reflecting on the rows of dusty filing cabinets. Anna took a deep breath and stepped inside. The sound of her shoes echoed on the rotten wooden floor, as if each step was awakening some soul that was sleeping there. On the walls, faded old class photos were still hung. The faces of the students in the photos seemed to blur under the light, leaving only empty eye sockets. She tried to ignore her unease and began to rummage through the filing cabinets. The drawers squeaked, dust flew up, and old papers fell to the floor. Each file contained the full name, year of birth, and address of each student. But the more Anna searched, the more desperate she became when she could not find any name of Daniel in the past 20 years. She was about to give up when suddenly, in the last drawer, she discovered a yellowed stack of papers stuck in a crack. There was no name on the cover, only a smudged ink mark, Class 11B. Inside was a list of students from the past. Anna quickly flipped through it until she reached the 13th line, when her hand stopped. There was a blank space there, with only a faintly erased letter printed on it. In the corner of the paper was a dark red smudge. It was unclear whether it was ink or something else. The more Anna looked, the more she felt shivers. Just then, a cold wind blew through, slamming the door shut. The flashlight flickered and then went out. The room was plunged into total darkness. Anna shakily lit a match, the small flickering light clearly illuminating the row of filing cabinets. And at the end of the row, she caught a glimpse of a tall, thin figure standing motionless, her hair falling over her face. The fire went out. In the darkness, the rustling of papers echoed everywhere, as if hundreds of hands were turning over the pages of a file. A whispering voice rushed into Anna's ears. "Miss me. Miss me," she screamed, waving her arms to find the light switch. The light came on, the room returned to normal. But the file she was holding had disappeared. Panicking, Anna rushed out, panting. In the hallway, the pale yellow light flickered repeatedly. She heard light footsteps following her, steady and slow. When she turned around, no one was there. But in the mirror hanging on the wall, she saw Daniel's shadow standing behind her, his dark eyes staring at her. Anna screamed, breaking the mirror, the glass falling everywhere. When she bent down, she saw the same image reflected in the broken pieces of mirror, Daniel's face, smiling coldly. The next day, she still came to class, but her face was haggard, her eyes were vacant. The students noticed that she trembled every time she mentioned Daniel's name. The whole class began to believe that the archive room was actually the place that hid the most terrifying haunted stories, where Daniel's memories had been intentionally erased. Sarah and Kevin decided to go back to that room with Anna the next night to find evidence. They believed that the truth about Daniel was being held there, and if they could just find the erased file, everything would be clear. But they did not know that this decision would push the group into a more terrible nightmare, opening the door to a secret that had been buried for many years. The next night, when the clock struck 12, Anna, Sarah, and Kevin returned to the archive room. The hallway was as quiet as a graveyard, with only the sound of the wind howling through the old glass windows. They brought a large flashlight and a tape recorder as evidence. The wooden door creaked open, and once again darkness and coldness rushed out from inside, enveloping the three of them. The flashlight beams swept across the dusty filing cabinets, each drawer slightly open as if someone had rummaged through it. Anna trembled, but still tried to stay calm, leading the two students inside. The room was so quiet that they could hear their heartbeats. Kevin picked up the tape recorder and turned it on, and the buzzing sound echoed in the space, making the tension rise even higher. Sarah walked closer to the last filing cabinet, the drawer where Anna had found the faintly marked list the day before. She opened it with trembling hands, and inside was a moldy leather-bound notebook. When she touched it, the room immediately shook. Papers flew everywhere, drawers opened automatically, making a loud noise. Faint letters appeared on the wall. "Don't forget my face." Kevin panicked, shining his flashlight around the room and screaming when he saw a tall, thin figure standing in the dark corner. Daniel appeared, still skinny, his hair covering his face. But this time, his eyes flashed like two black holes sucking in his gaze. Sarah collapsed in fear. The notebook fell to the floor, opened to the first page with a scribbled drawing of Daniel's face. No eyes, no nose, just a blank white space. The recorder began to make strange sounds. A child's laughter mixed with a miserable cry. Kevin shakily picked it up, but the screen flashed with strange characters. Meanwhile, Anna felt a cold hand on her shoulder. She turned around, only to see air, but in the broken mirror on the floor. The reflection showed Daniel standing close to her back, smiling faintly. Sarah screamed, clutching Anna's hand for help. The room seemed to shrink. The filing cabinet shook violently, papers whirling around the three of them like a whirlwind. In the chaos, Anna picked up the notebook. She flipped through it quickly, her eyes glued to the hastily scribbled lines. A detailed description of a student who had mysteriously disappeared from the school. The last pages read, "I will return until someone remembers my face." Suddenly, the flashlight went out. The room was plunged into total darkness. Footsteps echoed everywhere, circling around them, then stopping right next to their ears. A cold voice rang out, "You will forget me, too." In a moment of panic, Kevin flicked on a lighter, the small light clearly illuminating Daniel's pale face as he leaned over them, his eyes deep black. The flame went out, and all three collapsed. When they woke up, it was morning, the room empty as if nothing had happened. The notebook was gone, the recorder shattered. Sarah sobbed. Kevin was silent, his eyes were blank. Anna held her chest and gasped. She knew that Daniel was not just a ghost, but a curse living in this school. The scary stories that everyone whispered had now become a terrifying truth. From that day on, the three of them began to see Daniel everywhere. In the bathroom mirror, in the empty corner of the classroom, in the hallway when they came home late. No one else saw him, only them. The haunting obsession made them unable to distinguish between reality and dreams. After the night in the archives, Sarah, Kevin, and Anna could no longer live peacefully. Every day they saw strange signs around the school, as if Daniel was following them every step of the way. Every time they walked through the empty hallways, Sarah always felt like someone was staring at her from behind. One time, she glanced quickly at the mirror hanging on the classroom door, and almost fainted when she saw Daniel standing right behind her. But when she turned around, there was only empty space. Kevin kept hearing the familiar, 3-beat tapping sound under his desk every time he did his homework. He tried sitting at another desk, but the sound still echoed, as steady as a heartbeat right next to his ear. Once he tried to bend down quickly, but all he could see was pitch black darkness, and a cold breath that made him suffocate. Anna, who had a lot of experience dealing with student mysteries, now felt helpless. Every night she dreamed the same scene, standing in an abandoned classroom. The words, "Don't forget me," written on the blackboard, gradually appearing. The sound of chalk squeaking continued. She turned around and Daniel was there. Head bowed, hair covering his face, dark eyes shining when he looked up. The creepy recurring dreams left her haggard eyes dark, voice trembling. The obsession became heavier when many other students began to disappear in strange ways. First was Mark, who had seen Daniel in the dormitory. In the morning, his bed was empty, the door locked from the inside, no sign of resistance. Only an open notebook remained, with a page written in scribbled handwriting. "I have regained my memories." The whole school was bewildered. But strangely, after a few days, everyone began to forget Mark completely. Even close friends could no longer remember his face. Only Sarah, Kevin, and Anna retained their memories. They gradually realized that Daniel didn't just want attention. He was erasing everyone's memories to replace them with his own image. One afternoon, Sarah accidentally walked past the abandoned gym. She heard her name being called. When she looked up, on the old bleachers, Daniel was sitting there, head down, arms hanging limply. The air was so thick that Sarah couldn't breathe. She tried to run away, but her feet felt like they were stuck to the cement floor. In that moment, Daniel slowly raised his face, his empty black eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. Sarah screamed, then collapsed. When she woke up, she was in the medical room. Not remembering how she got there, Kevin encountered an even more horrifying phenomenon. One night, while studying in his room, he saw that the page he was writing on had been changed. The neat lines gradually turned into scribbled characters. "I'm here." He quickly tore the page, threw it in the trash, but the following pages also changed one by one. He tried to burn the notebook, but the fire died out, leaving behind a cold mist of smoke. Anna decided that she could no longer hide. She gathered Sarah and Kevin, saying that it was time to find out the real cause of the curse. She believed that there was a connection between Daniel and the erased records in the archives. But before she could act, she wanted to meet an old retired teacher who had taught at the school when Daniel disappeared in the dark of night. The three of them left the school, hoping to find answers. But they did not know that this decision would lead them to face an even more terrible truth. The person Anna decided to go to was Mr. Thomas, a history teacher who had been retired for more than 10 years. He had witnessed many incidents at the school and was probably the only one who still remembered the name Daniel. That evening, Anna took Sarah and Kevin to the small house in the suburbs, where Thomas lived in seclusion, in silence and obsession. The house was filled with a musty smell, the flickering yellow light clearly illuminating the thick layers of dust covering the interior. Thomas opened the door, his deep eyes flashing with fatigue and weariness. When he heard Daniel's name, he immediately stiffened, his trembling hand gripping the door. It took a long time before he let the three people in. They sat around the old wooden table. Thomas poured tea, but his hands were shaken so much that the water spilled out. He stared at Anna and asked hoarsely, "Did you guys really see it?" Anna nodded, recounting the details of Daniel's appearances, the entire storage room, the moldy notebook, and the terrifying whispers. After listening, Thomas sighed, his eyes gloomy. He began to tell. More than 20 years ago, the school had a real student named Daniel. He was a withdrawn boy, quiet, always sitting at the back of the class. Teachers almost forgot about his existence, and his friends could never remember his face. One day, Daniel suddenly disappeared. No one could find his file. No one could remember what he looked like. Only a few vague rumors remained, gradually becoming true scary stories passed around the school. Thomas said that right before Daniel disappeared, there were strange signs. The classroom lights often flickered, desks and chairs moved, and sometimes teachers heard their names being called in empty classrooms. When people tried to investigate, Daniel's entire file had been erased from the storage cabinet. Even the class photo showed a blurry blank space where Daniel should have been. Sarah shuddered at that. She remembered seeing Daniel in the gym, his blank face reflecting the sunset. Kevin clenched his fists, thinking of the creepy tapping under his desk that he endured every day. Thomas continued, his voice trembling. It is believed that Daniel was so forgotten that his soul was stuck between this world and the other. No one remembered him, and that made it impossible for him to move on. That is why he became a wandering ghost, trying to carve his memories into the minds of the living. Anna asked, "So why is he back now?" Thomas was silent for a moment, then replied, "Maybe it was because someone mentioned his name, opening up the sealed memories. Or maybe it was because the storage room itself, where the remains were kept, awakened his soul. Whatever the reason, the truth is that Daniel wants only one thing, to be remembered. But if we remember, we will lose another part of our memory to make room for his image. That is the terrible price we have to pay." Sarah trembled and asked, "Is there any way to escape this curse?" Thomas looked at her, his eyes filled with fear. He shook his head slightly. "No one can escape. There is only one way. to make Daniel recognized as part of the collective memory. But that means his soul will become stronger, and death, or disappearance, will continue to happen. While everyone was immersed in heavy silence, a noise rang out from the corner of the room. The old class photo hanging on the wall shook, then fell to the ground. The glass shattered, revealing a blurry photo. In the last row, where there used to be an empty space, there was now a tall, thin student with his hair covering his face. Anna, Sarah, and Kevin all paled when they realized it was Daniel. Thomas panicked, his voice breaking. "It found me. It never left that school." At that moment, the window burst open, the cold wind blew in and outside. They caught a glimpse of Daniel standing in the darkness, his deep black eyes staring into the room. The three of them and Thomas froze, realizing that the nightmare had only just begun, and to face the more terrible truth, they would have to return to the school. After witnessing the old class photo showing Daniel's figure, Anna, Sarah, Kevin, and Thomas all knew that they couldn't run away forever. The only way to free themselves was to return to the school to find out the truth. That night, the four of them quietly walked through the old school gate. The dim moonlight fell on the empty yard. The cold wind blew through the trees, creaking like a distant whisper. Entering the main hallway, they noticed that the space was completely different from the daytime. The walls were mottled, the fluorescent lights flickered continuously, and thick darkness crept everywhere. Sarah trembled and held Kevin's hand, while Thomas muttered intermittent prayers. Anna walked ahead, the flashlight in her hand illuminating the seemingly endless path. As they approached the old classroom of Class 11B, a strange sound rang out. The sound of chairs being dragged, the sound of footsteps, and the sound of chalk on the board. They stopped, their hearts pounding. The classroom door opened slightly, and cold blue light shone out. Anna took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Inside, the scene stunned everyone. The dusty rows of desks and chairs suddenly shone like new. The blackboard showed a scrawled line, "Remember me." At the desk at the back of the classroom, Daniel sat there, his head bowed, his hair covering most of his face. When they entered, he slowly raised his head. His deep black eyes looked straight ahead, making everyone feel the blood in their bodies freeze. Thomas trembled and stepped back, his voice hoarse. "It's true. It's been here all these years." Sarah burst into tears. Kevin hugged her shoulders tightly, while Anna tried to calm down, asking loudly, "Daniel, what do you want?" The room shook. The cold wind swept through. Papers flew everywhere. Daniel didn't say anything, just smiled faintly. That smile was like a crack opening an invisible door, and in a moment, they saw blurry figures appear all over the classroom. They were the missing students, their faces pale, their eyes lifeless, silently sitting in their seats. Emily was there too, her mouth moving but no sound came out. Thomas collapsed, tears rolling down his face. He whispered, "The haunted stories turned out to be real. All the children were trapped here." Anna tried to move forward, but the thick air seemed to bind her. Daniel stood up, walking slowly, his tall, thin figure reflected on the wall as if it were endless. In desperation, Sarah shouted, "Why did you choose us?" At that moment, the whole room echoed with a cold voice, "Because you missed me." Distorted laughter rang out from the shadows of the students. The overlapping sounds seemed to come from hell. Kevin held Sarah's hand tightly, both of them trembling as invisible hands reached out from the void, pulling on her shirt, touching her cold flesh. Anna shouted for Thomas, but he had already fainted. everything spun, the space distorted as if pulling everything into a nightmare loop. Just as they thought they were about to be swallowed, Daniel suddenly stopped, his eyes flashing, and then everything went dark. When they opened their eyes, they were in the hallway, the classroom door firmly closed. On the door, a deep inscription appeared. "You cannot escape," Anna gasped. Sarah burst into tears, and Kevin clenched his fists, determined to find a way to break the cycle. But they knew that the path ahead would only lead them deeper into the abyss of haunted stories, where memories and ghosts became one. After being swept out of class I-1B, Anna, Sarah, and Kevin trembled as they walked out into the schoolyard. The moon hung high in the sky, its pale light shining down on a cemetery. Thomas had already fainted, so the three of them had to help him out of the hallway. But as soon as they stepped down the stairs, Anna heard heavy breathing right next to her ear. She turned around in the darkness of the long hallway. Daniel was standing there, motionless, his dark eyes staring at them. They ran quickly, but the more they ran, the path seemed to stretch on forever. Each step echoed as if hundreds of people were running behind them. When they got close to the school gate, they suddenly saw lifeless students blocking the exit, lined up neatly like a class, waiting for roll call. Everyone's face was pale, their lifeless eyes staring straight ahead. In the middle of that line of people, Emily stood there, holding an old notebook in her hand, her lips moving as if she wanted to send a message. Sarah shouted for Emily, but at that moment, the shadows of the students turned to look at her. The cold air made Sarah collapse. Kevin rushed to pull his friend up, but his eyes met Daniel's. He was dizzy, his mind blank, memories of his family and himself fading, replaced by only the image of Daniel. Anna tried her best to pull them both out of the encirclement, but she couldn't. Invisible hands grabbed her, cold, pinning her to the cement floor. In desperation, she shouted, "Daniel, what do you want from us?" The wind whistled through the hallway, and for the first time, Daniel's hoarse voice rang out, cold as if from the abyss. "I just want to be remembered. Otherwise, you will disappear like them." The words stunned Anna. She understood that Daniel was more than a wandering soul. He was a rejected memory, an entity that lived on the forgetting of others. And to survive, he will continue to steal the memories of those around him. Thomas woke up at this time, weakly whispering, "This is the truth that the school has hidden." They tried to erase all traces of Daniel, believing that this would escape the curse. But it was that oblivion that turned him into an entity that yearned to exist more intensely than anyone else. True horror stories are not just rumors, they are the consequences of a memory that was cruelly erased. Sarah sobbed, hugging Kevin tightly, while Anna clenched her hands, her eyes filled with determination. She understood that if she did not find a way to break the loop, the whole school would be forever swallowed up in nightmares. But how to remember Daniel without losing herself? While they were in despair, Emily suddenly took a step forward. Although her face was expressionless, her hand trembled as she held out the notebook. Anna realized that it was the notebook that had disappeared in the storage room. On the opened page, the words appeared clearly. The truth cannot be buried at that moment. Daniel rushed forward, his figure fading into a black smoke that covered the entire schoolyard. The silhouettes of the students raised their heads in unison, their mouths moving to say the same sentence. "Remember me." The wind howled. The trees swayed. The sound of broken glass windows echoed everywhere. Everything was spinning, pulling everything into a chaotic whirlwind of memories. When Anna and her two students woke up, They found themselves standing in the middle of a classroom, but not in the present. The blackboard, the desks, the school uniforms, all had the style of 20 years ago. When they opened their eyes, Anna, Sarah, and Kevin were surprised to find that their surroundings had completely changed. It was no longer the dilapidated school, but the classroom from 20 years ago. The wooden desks and chairs were lined up in rows. The blackboard was clean. Daylight shone through the windows, but the air was thick and stifling to the point of being hard to breathe. On the walls hung brand new class photos, completely different from the blurry ones they had seen before. Sarah panicked and grabbed Kevin's hand. "We... Where are we?" Kevin swallowed, his eyes darting around, but he understood in his heart they had been pulled into the past, into the very memories of the school. At that moment, the classroom door swung open. A group of students walked in, laughing and talking loudly, but everything suddenly fell silent when Daniel appeared behind them. He sat down at the last desk, exactly where Anna had seen him in the present. The strange thing was that no one paid any attention to him, as if he was just an invisible blank in the eyes of his friends. The teacher walked in, calling out names, but when she got to Daniel, she hesitated and then passed by, as if the name had never existed. Anna was stunned by the sight. She understood that this was the beginning of all creepy stories about Daniel. A student present but no one acknowledged, no one remembered, and gradually disappeared from the collective memory. During class, Daniel just sat silently, his dark eyes looking out the window. Sarah tried to step closer, but realized that she was invisible. No one in the class recognized the presence of the three people. However, Daniel turned his head, his cold eyes looking straight at Sarah. She choked, clearly feeling that he knew they were here. Kevin trembled and stepped back, but Anna held him still. They needed to see everything to understand the truth. At recess, the other students rushed out of the classroom. Daniel was still sitting there, fiddling with an old notebook. He opened it and scribbled, "They will forget me." And at that moment, the blackboard in front of him automatically showed the same words, as if the classroom was also reflecting his thoughts. Sarah burst into tears. No one cares about him. That's why he turned into a ghost. Kevin whispered, but what made him disappear completely? Then, the scene changed abruptly. They saw Daniel entering the lab. A group of other students teased him, snatched the notebook from his hand, and threw it into the fire of the gas stove. Daniel rushed forward to try to get it back, but during the struggle, a loud explosion rang out. Smoke and fire erupted. Screams filled the room. When the smoke cleared, Daniel disappeared without a trace, leaving only ashes. Anna, Sarah, and Kevin were stunned. Thomas had said that Daniel had mysteriously disappeared, but no one mentioned this detail. It was clear that the school had covered up the incident, erased the records, and buried the memory forever. But Daniel's soul did not transcend, but was trapped in the collective memory, forever becoming a curse. Daniel suddenly appeared right in front of them, his face pale, his dark eyes glowing. He said, his voice hoarse, "You have seen the truth, but you will still forget." The cold wind blew. The tables and chairs shook violently. The windows shattered. The whole classroom deformed, the space distorted as if swallowing them. Anna screamed, hugging Sarah and Kevin tightly, but Daniel's shadow covered everything in the last moment before fainting. Anna heard a sentence echo, "If you want to escape me, remember my death." When they woke up, Anna, Sarah, and Kevin found themselves in a strange space. The room looked like a classroom, but was twisted, as if someone had twisted reality. The tables and chairs were suspended in the air. The windows opened, not to the sky, but to a deep darkness. The air was thick and cold, making it difficult for all three to breathe. Sarah whispered, trembling, "This is no longer the past or the present. This is where memories and nightmares merge." Kevin held her hand tightly, trying to stay calm, but his heart was pounding as if it was about to burst. Anna looked round, then stopped when she saw Daniel standing in the middle of the class. A thin figure, his hair hanging down, his deep black eyes staring at them. On the blackboard behind Daniel, each scribbled line appeared and disappeared. "Remember me." Each line was like a knife carving deep into Sarah's mind, causing her to hold her head and cry out in pain. Kevin tried to reassure his friend, but he himself heard a whisper in his ear. "You will forget everything, only I exist." Anna took a step forward, her voice trembling. "Daniel, we have seen the truth. You have been forgotten, erased from memory. But killing an obsession cannot bring you back." Daniel did not answer. He raised his hand, and immediately the space around him changed. Fragments of broken memories flew everywhere, assembling into short scenes like short horror stories piled up. A scene appeared, Emily standing in the empty hallway, her eyes lifeless, her hands clutching an old notebook. Behind her was Daniel, his cold breath on the back of her neck. Emily turned and screamed, but the sound disappeared into the air. Another scene flashed, Mark sitting in the dorm room, his face fading as if erased from memory, leaving only Daniel's cold smile on the mirror. Then another scene, a night class. All the desks and chairs were empty. Only Daniel sat at the back, his dark eyes looking at the board. On the blackboard, dozens of bloody hands were imprinted, writing the same sentence over and over again. "Don't forget me," Sarah shouted. "Stop. We don't want to see anymore." But Daniel just smiled, his smile stiff. Then his figure faded. The fragments of memory spun faster, sucking everything into the vortex. Kevin collapsed, cold sweat on his forehead. He whispered, "If we continue, we will be trapped forever in these fragments of memory." Anna clenched her hands, trying to calm down. There must be a way out. Find some detail in the memory that can break this loop. At that moment, the whole room went dark. Only a notebook hovered in front of them. On the page appeared a scrawled line. "To escape, remember my death." Anna shivered. She understood that Daniel was forcing them to witness the final moment. The moment he disappeared and became a ghost in the collective memory. But if they remembered, what would happen to their own memories? In the howling wind, the distorted room shattered, pulling the three of them into a deep darkness. They knew that the answer lay ahead. The dark space around them shattered like glass, pulling Anna, Sarah, and Kevin straight into another scene. When they opened their eyes, they found themselves standing in the old chemistry lab of the school. But everything looked the same as 20 years ago. The pungent smell of chemicals filled the air, the fluorescent lights were buzzing, and the laughter of students echoed everywhere in the middle of the room. Daniel sat with his head bowed, hugging his old notebook tightly to his chest. A group of other students stood around him, teasing him non-stop. One of them snatched the notebook away and threw it around, while Daniel tried to run after him. Sarah trembled and held Kevin's hand tightly, while Anna gritted her teeth, her heart aching at the sight of the cruel scene. Finally, the notebook was thrown straight into the flames that erupted from the gas stove. Daniel rushed forward desperately, screaming hoarsely, but no one heard him. He swung his arm to pull the notebook out, and at that moment, a loud explosion rang out. Fire broke out in the room. Thick smoke engulfed everything. Screams, running, and the sound of shattering glass mixed together, creating a terrifying chaos. Anna, Sarah, and Kevin could clearly feel the heat, but they knew this was not reality, but a fragment of memory being recreated. However, everything was so real that it made them suffocate. In the hazy smoke, Daniel's figure gradually disappeared, leaving an empty space in the middle of the room. Then suddenly, the fire went out, the smoke cleared. The lab was empty, no one was left. Only Daniel stood there, his deep black eyes looking at the three people. He spoke hoarsely. "You have seen the truth. I have been forgotten, and my memory has been erased. But the curse remains forever." Sarah burst into tears. "But you cannot make us pay for the mistakes of others." Daniel was silent. A faint smile flashed across his face. He raised his hand, and from the four corners of the room, the shadows of students appeared one by one, their faces pale, their eyes lifeless. They were souls trapped by the same curse. Emily was among them, her lips moving but making no sound. Kevin shouted, "What must we do to end this?" Daniel stepped closer, his shadow stretching endlessly across the floor. He leaned in, his breath cold, whispering, "Bring me back to your memories. Let everyone remember me, even if only once." Anna stepped back, her heart pounding. She knew the price. If they agreed, Daniel would be allowed to exist in the collective memory, but that meant someone else would be erased. A memory for a memory, a soul for a soul. Suddenly, all the lights went out. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed throughout the room. The tables and chairs shook violently. The shadows of the students rushed towards them, their cold hands reaching out. Sarah screamed. Kevin hugged her tightly, and Anna used all her strength to push them both out of the encirclement. But Daniel's shadow was still everywhere, enveloping them in the chaos. Anna saw the old notebook reappearing on the lab table. On the opened page was a scrawled line, "To escape, remember me." She understood that they were being forced into the final choice. Either accept Daniel, or be erased forever in this terrifying memory loop. In a suffocating moment, the room shook violently, and the three of them were pulled into the deep darkness again. Darkness enveloped them, and when they opened their eyes, Anna, Sarah, and Kevin found themselves standing in a familiar classroom, but distorted, as if the whole space was moving. The blackboard in front of them was no longer silent, but flashing like a projection screen, continuously showing horrifying scenes. On the board, they saw the explosion in the lab again, but this time in such detail that it was like a movie. They clearly saw Daniel covered in fire and smoke, his eyes wide open but not making a sound. The scene repeated in slow motion, then turned into Daniel's distorted face, his deep black eyes staring out of the board dot. Sarah trembled, holding her head. These are not memories anymore. These are animated horror stories, vivid images created from Daniel's own pain and obsession. Kevin tried to pull her to stand, but he himself was stunned when he saw his face appear on the board, slowly fading away until it disappeared completely. Anna looked around, seeing the desks and chairs in the classroom constantly moving. They slid across the floor, creaking, forming a circle around the three people. On each desk, notebooks opened, automatically writing scribbled lines, "Remember me." The handwriting seemed to have a soul, writhing on the page and then transformed into an image of Daniel sitting at the back of the class. Suddenly, The blackboard showed Sarah standing in the hallway, crying out Emily's name. Then the image changed. Emily appeared, but her face was pale. Her eyes were empty, approaching Sarah. Sarah screamed, collapsed, because the scene was so real, as if Emily was really rushing towards her. Kevin hugged her tightly, but he was also drawn into the image on the board, where he himself was sitting in the dormitory, his face distorted, gradually disappearing as if he had never existed. Anna understood that this was a trap. These animated horror stories were not just images, but also had the power to devour souls. If they believed that the scenes were real, they would be stuck in this loop forever. She shouted, "Daniel, we remember. You are no longer forgotten." In that moment, the image on the board stopped. Daniel appeared in the middle of the class, his smile stiff, his black eyes shining. He whispered, "Remember me, but can't escape me." The desks suddenly rushed forward, pressing Anna, Sarah, and Kevin into the middle. The cold wind blew, papers flew everywhere, distorted sounds echoed like crying and laughter mixed together. The whole space spun, turning into a living nightmare. Sarah fainted in Kevin's arms. He shouted, trying to wake her up, but Daniel moved closer, bent down, his cold hand placed on Kevin's shoulder. Anna rushed to stop him, but an invisible force stopped her. Daniel looked straight at Kevin. Hoarsely, "You will be the next memory." At that moment, the blackboard behind Daniel cracked open, and a red light poured out like a door leading to the abyss. The darkness swallowed everything, pulling them into a new space. And when Anna opened her eyes, she realized that they had been transported to another, even more terrifying place, where the sound of falling rain and mysterious whispers echoed. The darkness dissipated. Anna opened her eyes and realized that they were no longer in the deformed classroom. Instead, they were standing in an old dormitory room. It was raining outside the window. Heavy raindrops pattered against the glass, accompanied by gusts of cold wind. The room had only a single bed and a small desk, the light from the ceiling lamp flickering weakly, making everything dim. Sarah hugged Kevin tightly, tremblingly whispering, "This place is like someone's home alone room." Kevin nodded, his eyes darting around, but he clearly felt that something was lurking in the darkness. Anna approached the desk. There was an open notebook on it, shakily scribbled and rewritten. "I don't want to be alone." The more she read, the more she felt the despair seeping into each line, like a cry for help from an abandoned soul. Suddenly, the sound of the bed creaking rang out. The three of them turned around, their hearts pounding. On the single bed, a small figure lay curled up under the blanket, trembling all over. Sarah walked closer, calling softly, "Daniel." The blanket slowly slid down, revealing a pale face with empty black eyes. It was Daniel, but not the tall and thin student they had seen before, but a smaller, weaker Daniel, as if trapped in his own memories. He spoke hoarsely, "I have been here alone. For too long. No one remembers, no one cares. They let me disappear as if I had never existed." Those words echoed in the room, mixed with the sound of rain outside the window. Sarah burst into tears, and Kevin squeezed her hand. Anna took a step forward, trying to say, "We remember. We have seen the truth. You are no longer forgotten." But Daniel shook his head. His figure suddenly grew taller, his hair falling down to cover his face, his deep black eyes flashing. His voice changed, echoing, "You will only remember for a moment. Then you will forget like everyone else. And I will always be here, alone, in this home alone room." Immediately, The window burst open, the wind blew in strongly, driving rain all over the room. The ceiling light flickered and exploded. Darkness covered everything. The whole room shook violently. The tables and chairs crashed loudly. From the walls, a series of black hands reached out. Reaching towards the three people, Sarah screamed. Kevin tried to pull her towards the door, but the door was locked. Anna rushed forward and banged with all her might, but to no avail. Behind them, Daniel had stood up completely, his tall and thin figure filling the room, his black eyes shining like two endless pits. He whispered, "You will stay with me. No one will escape." In that moment, the whole room shattered into pieces, turning into a deep darkness. Anna, Sarah, and Kevin are caught in a vicious cycle, knowing that what lies ahead is a door to an even more terrifying nightmare. The rain poured down. When they opened their eyes, Anna, Sarah, and Kevin found themselves standing in the middle of their old schoolyard, but it wasn't daytime. The night sky was pitch black. The rain was pouring down heavily, each drop echoing like a pounding drum. The rain sounds kept coming to their ears, carrying a strange tone like a mysterious whisper. Sarah trembled, holding Kevin's hand tightly, her eyes wide open as she looked around. The space filled with rain made everything blurry, but she had a distinct feeling that someone was following her. Anna raised her head, her hair soaked, her eyes fixed on the dark corridor ahead. There, through the rain, stood a silhouette of a person standing motionless. Daniel. He was tall and thin, his hair hanging down to cover his face, his wet uniform clinging to his body. Despite the heavy rain, he didn't move, just stood there staring at them. Kevin swallowed, raised his flashlight to shine. But the light was blocked by the rain. Daniel's figure became even more blurred. As if melting into the rain, suddenly, from all directions, a child's voice whispered in the rain, "Remember me, remember me." The rain sounds mixed with the whispers, creating a creepy music that pierced Sarah's ears, causing her to hold her head and cry. Kevin tried to comfort her, but he himself felt dizzy. Anna shouted, "Daniel, if you want to be remembered, then tell us the truth." The atmosphere suddenly became heavier. The rain pounded the schoolyard in mottled circles. At each circle of water, the silhouette of a lifeless student appeared, squatting, eyes looking up blankly. The originally spacious schoolyard was now filled with human figures. Emily was there too, her hair wet, her trembling hand reaching out to Sarah. Sarah rushed forward, but when she was about to touch, Emily's image dissolved into water, merging into the rain. Sarah collapsed, her cries mixing with the sound of the falling rain. Kevin clenched his fists, shouting into the night, "Enough, Daniel. Tell us what price you want us to pay." Daniel slowly raised his head. His deep black eyes flashed, reflecting the lightning that tore across the sky. His voice echoed, mixed with the sound of the rain. "If you want to escape, step into the place where the rain never stops." At that moment, the ground beneath their feet began to crack. Black puddles spread out, dragging all three of them down. Sarah screamed, Kevin hugged her tightly, and Anna tried to hold both of their hands. But the power of the rain was too great, swallowing them into darkness. When the darkness shattered again, Anna opened her eyes and found that they were no longer in the dormitory room. Instead, the three of them were standing in the middle of a dense, misty forest. The moonlight filtered through the bare branches, and the wind blew, creating an eerie sound. Sarah shook and squeezed Kevin's hand, while Anna tried to calm herself. But her heart was pounding. In front of them was a small clearing, where an old tent had been set up. The flashlight inside the tent gave off a dim light, as if someone had just been there but had disappeared. The space was unusually quiet, with only the rustling of leaves and the blowing of wind, like an abandoned camping trip in the middle of the forest. Kevin whispered, "Where is this? Whose memory are we being dragged into this time?" Anna didn't answer, but she had a hunch that they were entering another layer of Daniel's memory, a place filled with loneliness and despair. They approached the tent. When Anna touched the canvas, a chill ran down her spine. Sarah took a deep breath and lifted the tent flap. Inside was empty, except for a notebook lying on the ground. The page was open, and the scribbled words were clearly visible. "I've been waiting for you here." Suddenly, the sound of a branch breaking rang out behind them. All three of them turned around, their hearts stopping. In the mist, human figures appeared. They stood silently in the middle of the forest, their faces blurred, their eyes staring blankly at the tent. Sarah screamed, and Kevin quickly pulled her back. Anna gritted her teeth, feeling like dozens of spirits were surrounding them. The figures began to approach. The dry footsteps on the rotten leaves echoed regularly, eerie. With each step, they heard a whisper mixed with the wind. "Remember me." Kevin panicked, holding his flashlight and shining it everywhere. The light swept across, but instead of dispelling them, the figures became clearer. They were not living people, but ghosts of students who had disappeared. Emily stood among them, her face pale, her eyes lifeless, her lips moving constantly. Anna stepped forward, shouting, "Daniel, stop. We have seen enough." From the deep darkness of the forest, a tall, thin figure slowly stepped out. Daniel appeared, his hair hanging over his face, his eyes deep black. He stood there, motionless, but the whole forest seemed to have stopped breathing. The air was so thick and cold that Sarah felt her chest constrict. Daniel hoarsely said, "You have seen me everywhere. In the classroom, in the hallway, in the lab. Now, in the middle of this deep forest. You cannot escape me." The wind howled. Ghostly figures rushed towards the tent. The whole tent shook. The canvas ripped open, revealing the inside now full of black hands reaching out. Kevin shouted, pulling Sarah away, while Anna tried to support the two students. But no matter how they ran, they were still wandering around the forest, the path leading nowhere. Sarah burst into tears. "We are trapped here." Kevin gritted his teeth, his eyes filled with despair. Anna took a deep breath and shouted, "Daniel, if you want to be remembered, then tell us the final truth." In that moment, all the figures stopped. Daniel raised his head, his black eyes shining like a bottomless pit. He whispered, his voice echoing in the forest, "The final truth is where death begins." Immediately, the ground beneath their feet cracked open, swallowing all three of them into darkness. The scream echoed and then died away. When they opened their eyes, they found themselves pulled into a new space, even more terrifying than the forest. When they opened their eyes, Anna, Sarah, and Kevin found themselves back in the school. But everything had changed. The familiar school now resembled a real haunted place, dark, distorted, and filled with soulless ghosts. The hallways were long and endless. The walls were stained with blood. The windows were broken and the wind howled through the cracks. The space was filled with the smell of mold, mixed with the old smell of smoke from the laboratory fire 20 years ago. Sarah trembled and clung to Kevin, and Kevin squeezed her hand as if letting go would swallow them both. Anna tried to stay calm, but her eyes were also filled with fear. Whispers echoed everywhere. "Remember me." The voices overlapped, echoing from all directions, like dozens of voices of missing students. They walked down the hallway. The light from the flashlights was dim enough to dispel the darkness. On the walls, old classroom photos appeared one by one, but all the faces in the photo were blurred, leaving only one clear face, Daniel. His eyes stared out of the photo, causing all three to turn away in surprise. The door to Class 11B opened without anyone touching it. From inside, a cold blue light shone out, drawing them closer. When they entered, they saw the classroom covered in dust, but on the blackboard was still a fresh line: "You cannot escape." The desks and chairs moved with a creak, automatically forming a circle around them. Emily appeared in a corner of the classroom, but her face was pale, her eyes lifeless, her mouth moving silently. Sarah rushed forward, tears streaming down her face, but Kevin held her back. He knew that what stood before them was no longer the real Emily, but just a piece of memory that Daniel had imprisoned. Daniel slowly appeared at the back of the classroom, his hair covering his face, his footsteps making no sound. He walked towards them, his black eyes flashing. As he smiled, the whole classroom shook violently. The lifeless shadows of students appeared, sitting in each chair, facing Anna, Sarah, and Kevin. The space was filled with whispers. "Stay with us," Anna shouted. "Daniel, what do you want from us?" The wind howled, papers flew everywhere, and then Daniel's voice echoed throughout the classroom. "I want to be remembered, ... forever, immediately." The light bulb shattered. Darkness engulfed the entire room. Cold hands reached out from under the table, clinging to their legs. Sarah screamed. Kevin tried to pull her away, and Anna struggled to escape. But the more she resisted, the tighter the hands tightened in a moment of despair. The blackboard in front cracked, revealing a deep, red void like a door leading to hell. Daniel pointed in that direction, his eyes flashing, his voice echoing, "To escape this haunted place. Dare to face my last memory." The three were pushed by an invisible force, drawn into that fiery red void. Screams echoed. Darkness swallowed everything again, bringing them to an even more terrifying place. The red vortex swallowed them, throwing Anna, Sarah, and Kevin to the cold ground. When they looked up, they realized they were in a strange space. The room looked like a classroom, but the walls were covered with half-burned, floating pages. The red light from the cracks in the floor illuminating each shaky line. "Don't forget me," in the middle of the room. Daniel stood there, a thin figure, deep black eyes. As they walked closer, the scene around him changed. The image was like a distorted film opening, telling the true stories of his life. They saw Daniel many years ago, a quiet boy, sitting quietly at the back of the class. No one paid attention, no one called his name. When the teacher called the roll, his name came, the whole class fell silent, and the teacher passed by as if that name had never existed. Another scene appeared. Recess, groups of students laughing. But Daniel sat alone in the corner of the yard, hugging an old notebook. Some other students teased him, snatching the notebook and throwing it around, letting him chase after it in despair. The notebook fell into a puddle, the ink smudged, but Daniel still bent down to pick it up, holding it tightly to his chest. His eyes were full of despair, but no one cared. Anna, Sarah, and Kevin were stunned as they witnessed it. The true stories were clear, no longer rumors. Daniel had really been abandoned, forgotten even though he still existed. Then they saw the scene of the laboratory. The notebook was thrown into the fire. An explosion rang out. Daniel disappeared in a puff of smoke. The teachers panicked, trying to cover up the incident, hiding even the records, erasing his name from the list. They agreed with each other that silence was the only way for the school to escape the scandal. And so Daniel was completely erased from the collective memory, as if he had never existed. Sarah burst into tears. It's not fair. They buried the truth, turning a person into a ghost. Kevin squeezed her hand, his eyes filled with resentment. Anna whispered, "These are the true stories that we must know, but also the reason the curse exists." Daniel looked at them, his voice hoarse. "You saw, you knew, but once you know, you must pay the price." Immediately, the room shook violently. The half-burned pages flew towards them like paper knives, cutting through their flesh. Sarah screamed. Kevin tried to hug her tightly to shield her. Anna rushed forward, shouting, "Daniel, we miss you. We will not forget you again." The space fell silent for a moment. Daniel stopped, his eyes flashing. But then he whispered, "Remembering me is not enough. You must replace me." Those words sent a chill down their spines. The lifeless shadows of students gradually appeared throughout the room, each pair of empty eyes staring at them. Emily also appeared, her lips moving a soundless sentence. The whole room was filled with whispers. "Remember me. Replace me." Anna, Sarah, and Kevin were cornered, with no way out. The darkness from Daniel's eyes spread, engulfing the room, pulling all three into another space, where the circle of revenge began to close. The darkness had just cleared. Anna, Sarah, and Kevin realized they were standing in class I-1B again, but this time the space was different. The room was red as if covered by an invisible fire. On the blackboard, the words were burned, "Remember me." The tables and chairs were distorted, scorched. The smell of smoke was strong, as if recreating the moment of the explosion years ago. Daniel stood in the middle of the class, his dark eyes deep, his voice echoing. "You have seen the truth. You have known that I was forgotten, but now you will understand my pain. This is no longer a memory. This is a spiral of revenge." Immediately, the soulless shadows of students appeared, filling the rows of desks. Each face was pale, their eyes staring blankly. Among them were Emily, Mark, and other faces they had known. All of them whispered in unison, "Give us back our memories. Give us back our existence." Sarah panicked. "This is not our fault." But Daniel interrupted with a hoarse roar. "You came in, you saw. Now you pay the price." Invisible hands reached up from the ground, grabbed their legs, and pulled them down. Kevin tried to pull away, but the more he struggled, the stronger the pull became. Sarah screamed, tears streaming down her face, and Anna used all her strength to hold the two students' hands, trying not to let them be swallowed in desperation. The blackboard in front of them suddenly turned into a giant mirror. In the mirror, they no longer saw themselves, but the image of Daniel when he was alive. Lonely, small, forgotten, teased. Then the image distorted, turning into a face full of hatred, black eyes glowing. Daniel stepped closer to the mirror, reached out to touch it. The image in the mirror also reached out. A black aura spread throughout the classroom, pulling Anna, Sarah, and Kevin in. They found themselves going through revenge stories one by one, each scene a nightmare. Kevin found himself erased from the memories of his friends. No one remembered his name, even though he screamed until he was hoarse. Sarah found herself locked in a dark hallway, All the doors closed, only a whisper of "remember me." Anna found herself standing alone in the teacher's room, all the student records visible, except for one name that had been erased, leaving a cold void. Those scenes were so overwhelming, they all collapsed. Daniel stepped forward, his voice cold, pain, despair. "That's what I've endured. And now you will become a part of me too." The tables and chairs shook violently. The ceiling cracked and red light poured down. The shadows of the students stood up, walking step by step towards them. Emily was the closest, her face expressionless but her lips moving a soundless sentence. Sarah tried to look and realized that Emily was whispering, "Run." Anna screamed, pulling both students towards the door. But when he touched the handle, the door disappeared, leaving only a red wall. Daniel laughed dryly, the sound echoing like steel being torn apart. The entire classroom suddenly exploded, engulfing everyone in a vortex of pitch-black light. Anna, Sarah, and Kevin screamed in despair, but no one heard them. They knew that ahead was where the final nightmare awaited. The thick darkness opened up, swallowing Anna, Sarah, and Kevin, throwing them back into the familiar classroom but distorted beyond recognition. The ceiling cracked, a red light shining down as if from the abyss. The scorched, distorted desks and chairs arranged themselves in a circle to surround them. The lifeless shadows of students filled the seats, their empty eyes staring at the three people in the middle of the room. Daniel stood tall and thin, his hair covering half his face. His black eyes glowed like a bottomless pit. When he spoke, the sound echoed throughout the space. "You have seen the truth. You know the pain I have suffered. But there is only one thing missing. You must choose." Anna stepped forward, her voice trembling but determined. "Daniel, we have missed you. We acknowledge you. So why is it not enough?" Daniel tilted his head slightly. A cold smile flashed. "Remembering is never enough. Memories are fragile. They will fade. We need more than that. I need to exist forever. And to do that, one of you must replace me." The words fell like a knife slashing into their hearts. Sarah shook her head in panic. "No, it can't be." Kevin clenched his fists, his eyes shining with determination. Anna gasped, her heart torn. All around, the lifeless shadows of students whispered in unison, "Replace, replace." The sound echoed, urgent, making the air even more suffocating. Daniel raised his hand, pointing straight at Kevin. You will be the next memory." Kevin was stunned, but then his eyes burned with determination. He stepped forward in front of Anna and Sarah, chokingly saying, "If someone must stay to break this curse, then let me do it." Sarah shouted, "No, I can't do that." But Kevin smiled weakly. "Sarah, if no one stops this cycle, we will be trapped here forever. Live and remember, Daniel, so that no one else will be forgotten." Anna's eyes filled with tears, knowing that Kevin had made his choice. Daniel approached, the darkness from his eyes enveloping Kevin. The entire room shook violently. The lifeless shadows of the students disappeared one by one, leaving only the howling wind at the last moment. Kevin turned back, smiling at Anna and Sarah. "Get out, and don't forget anyone." The darkness swallowed Kevin. Daniel was silent, his eyes flashing one last time before the whole space collapsed. Anna and Sarah screamed, then woke up. They found themselves sitting in a normal classroom, the morning sunlight shining through the window. Everything was quiet as if the nightmare had never happened. but the seat at the back of the class was empty. Kevin was gone. Sarah burst into tears, while Anna remained silent. In the notebook on the table, a scribbled line appeared. "I am remembered." They both understood that Kevin had sacrificed himself, replacing Daniel to end the loop. But the question remains, is it really over? Asterisk, please like and subscribe to the channel to listen to the next episode. Thanks you.